So this is a question and answer session. Dhamma discussion is part of the way we grow in our practice, particularly for helping us gain right view, sammaditthi. And one of the ways we gain right view is listening to the Dhamma. That can include reading the Dhamma from the texts, listening from teachers, and discussing the Dhamma, asking questions, considering answers as well. Someone outside asked me a question, I'll answer. It's not one of the written ones. They were asking me, why does life seem like a continuous succession of problems? One problem after another. Which probably most people will have sometime thought that maybe in their lives. It's a very common experience. Well, listening to the Dhamma might help give you an answer to that. Because if you listen or read the Buddha's teachings regularly, you'll see he was pointing out all the flaws and drawbacks of living in the world as a human being. In the morning chanting, one of the lines is, we are bound up with dukkha and obstructed by dukkha. Life is mixed with dukkha. Now this word dukkha we usually translate as suffering. It can mean pain, physical pain, mental pain. A more modern translation might actually be problems. We encounter problems, difficulties, as one part of dukkha. And the fact that things don't last, they're always changing, is also dukkha. So there's a few different aspects to the idea or the concept of dukkha, suffering. But if you hear the Dhamma often, then you'll be familiar with the wisdom of the Buddha. They're just pointing out this world is not perfect, it's imperfect. You're born into the world, you have a human body. A human body is not perfect because every day we need food, air, water. When it's cold, we need heat. When it's too hot, we need to cool down. That's the nature of physical existence in the world. It's imperfect, and our body is fragile, needs all kinds of supports. So just that simple truth is already pointing out there are some challenges and difficulties to living in the world as a human being. The Buddha gave the simple description: your birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, and death is dukkha. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are dukkha. Being associated with what you don't like is dukkha. Separated from what you like is dukkha. Not attaining one's wishes is dukkha. These are normal, everyday experiences that we encounter. If it's minor dukkha, we usually overlook it, but it's still there. We often only really take note of dukkha as an experience when it's big, when it seems to really hit us. So like extreme illness or accident or big relationship problems may lead to separation from someone you love or like, misunderstandings, and then conflicts, arguments, physical abuse, verbal abuse. When dukkha becomes big, then we really take note of it. But actually it's there all the time in our life, niggling us. The imperfections of the world, the inability to sustain happiness all the time. And of course some people say, oh, Buddhism is very depressing, always talking about dukkha. And the Buddha wasn't obsessed with dukkha, he's just pointing out the way things are from a perspective of clarity, mindfulness, wisdom that really sees and knows and sees the way things are. So he's just saying how it is. But if you listen to the Dhamma often and practice the Dhamma often, then your views and the way you look at life and the world start to take shape in a correct way, in line with the truth. And you realize, life has its ups and downs and problems. But the thing is, not to attach, to identify with the imperfections of the world, but to know them and then let go of the reactions that habitually form. So when we don't get what we want, our mind takes over with craving and attachment, saying, I didn't get what I want, I'm unhappy, I'm disappointed. That's where the dukkha of the world becomes a problem. What we think about it, how we view it, how we hold on to experiences of dukkha. And that's particularly where meditation and what we're doing these next 4 days can help clear things up a bit. Because it's quite possible to encounter problems or dukkha, but just to know them as the way things are. Sometimes understanding them better, we can solve them. Sometimes we just have to endure them. Sometimes the dukkha is still there, but our attitude towards it changes simply by becoming aware and clear on what we're facing, what we're engaged with. But if you listen to the Dhamma often, you'll get to see the nature of the world is imperfect. So of course there will be problems. Earning a living, living with other people, health problems, social problems, economic problems, life problems, one after another. And as long as we live in the world, that's going to continue. But the important thing is to develop the right view and the right attitude and the right ways of dealing with what we call problems. And one of the blessings of living with Ajahn Chah and his teachings is that he was very good at pointing out this truth that the world is imperfect, but really the problem is that we attach to it and we identify it with it as self. We take ownership of the dukkha and then it becomes a problem. But if we have enough mindfulness and insight into the not self and see that everything is conditioned and ultimately we don't own or control things, then the sense of problems disappears, even though there's still problems, but we're not attached to them. So one person described Ajahn Chah's magic. The magic of his teachings is that he can make big problems shrink down into little problems, and little problems completely disappear through his teaching, through his wisdom. And that's one of the values of wisdom that we get from the Buddha first, but then that we develop through our own practice, seeing things as they are, is this sense of making things into a problem, taking everything personally, worrying, suffering with things, that starts to disappear, gets less and less. And you'll never completely get rid of all the problems in the world because that's the nature of worldly life. Yeah, it's impermanent, it's conditioned, it's not controllable ultimately. So the Buddhist way is not to rid the world of every single problem and then be happy. One finds happiness within the world by knowing the nature of the world and accepting that's the way it is and seeing clearly that's the way it is. So it's a subtle point, but as a meditator we often miss it because as soon as we're meditating we still bring in this idea, I've got a problem with my meditation. I fall asleep, or I think too much, or my leg hurts, or I don't have enough good karma, I don't have enough merit. What we're not recognizing is that subtly our craving and attachment is sneaking into the way we think, even with our meditation. And so we are making a problem out of it. So one of Lumpur Cha's leading students, Ajahn Sumedho, you probably all know him or heard of him. One of his favorite reflections is, whatever happens, don't make a problem out of it. Because things do happen in life, of course, life happens, as they say. But don't make a problem out of it. So, another good example of this, like Ajahn Chah said, when he first started practicing meditation, he was practicing mindfulness of breathing, and he'd read the books, heard the talks. He wanted to make his mind calm and concentrated and still and experience the happy mind that he'd heard about. So he started following the breath, observing the breath go in, breath go out, practicing mindfulness. But because he was perhaps trying too hard, he started to make a problem out of it. Sometimes he's trying to control the breath, so he's trying to make it long or short, or go in a certain way, and he's trying to force his mind to stay with the breath, and that gave him a bit of a headache. And he said after a while he got totally despondent and disappointed and thought, this is impossible to practice mindfulness of breathing. It's so difficult. The breath is a problem. I feel uncomfortable. I can't be with the breath for very long. The breath is too short, too long. But then he realized after seeing that, he said, before I practiced meditation, I never had a problem breathing. I just did it. Once you're born, you start breathing. You never think about it. You never make a problem out of it. It just happens by itself. But as soon as I started to meditate, the breath became a problem. And, I had itchy nose, so I had short breath, long breath, fast breath, slow breath, or I couldn't find my breath, or I was trying to control it and force it to be a certain way. The breath became a problem. And that was because he said he was bringing self-view into his meditation. He was clinging too much and making a problem out of just watching the breath. So even meditation can become a problem if we're not aware of what we're doing and we don't realize that we're still clinging with this sense of self. So he said, having seen this problem, seeing this suffering come up during his meditation, he changed his approach a bit. And he would just gently take his mind to watch the breath, be with the breath, but let it go naturally, and teach himself not to cling or force or control his mind as he did it. He saw that really the problem was he had too much desire in his practice. He was trying to control the breath, control his meditation, and it was actually making things harder. So this is a good example of problems in our life. Often there's a genuine problem to start with, perhaps, but then we come in with our ideas and our sense of self-control and self-identity, and we often make it worse, make it bigger than it really needs to be, make it worse than it needs to be because of craving and clinging. When we recognize what we're doing, we start to let go of the craving and clinging, the problem starts to subside, and sometimes it just solves itself all by itself, because we realize it was our own desire that was making the problem into a problem. So yes, of course, there will be problems in life. There always have been, there always will be in the world, or what we call samsara, the endless round of birth and death. Is many lives, many worlds. It seems like endless problems. That's one aspect of samsara, and you could say it's wisdom when you recognize that. You say, yes, samsara, or the world, is full of endless problems. The important thing is not to cling, not to attach, to develop enough clarity to see where you are clinging and attaching and let go. So the Buddha still lived in the world. The Buddha still had to face aging, sickness and death, living with other people, some of them good people, some of them gave him trouble. All the problems of the world were still there for the Buddha, but his mind didn't cling to them and didn't make problems out of every part of his experience. He had enough mindfulness and wisdom not to do that. So it's just an answer to a question that was given in the monastery just now about problems. We also have some other questions. First one is, how do we deal with sleepiness during meditation, please? Many thanks. Well, this is a very pertinent question, because in Melbourne at the moment, or in the middle of the day, the monks have all had their one big meal of the day. It's hot, and sleepiness almost certainly will be an issue over the next few hours until the food is digested. So one thing you learn when you practice meditation regularly is the relationship between food and sleepiness. And when you eat a certain amount of food, it starts to draw your blood and your energy to the digestion process in your stomach. And you're light-headed because you've got less blood going to the brain. You feel heavy. Your energy seems to be sapped by the digestion process. So you feel sleepy after eating a lot. It's quite normal. So often monks will do walking meditation after a meal or some other activity as they're digesting food. And the Buddha even said walking meditation helps your digestion. It's quite healthy. Doesn't mean to say you can't sit, but you just have to work harder when you're digesting food. Same with lay people in the evening. Very common complaint is I come home from work, I have my dinner, and then I meditate, but my mind is really weak and I just fall asleep. Well, that's partly perhaps because you've eaten a meal, partly because you've also expended a lot of mental energy through your day working, and so you're physically and mentally tired together. So it really is a challenge to maintain mindfulness and not fall asleep. So that's another common experience. Another factor in sleepiness is lack of stimulation. We've become very dependent on all kinds of stimulation, sense stimulation in our society. We have a lot of sense stimulation available. We have a phone which can endlessly stimulate us with images, sounds, music, information, contact with other people, and so on. So if you put your phone down, it's like your mind is ready to go off, turn off, go into hibernation mode. We rely on a lot of stimulation, and we're often experiencing overstimulation. So a modern problem often is can't sleep at night, too much stimulation, thinking about all this stuff you've seen, read, heard. So the general advice is, don't use your phones and computers right up to the point where you go to bed at night. Turn them off long before you go to sleep. Keep them away from you during the night is a good practice, because that stimulation can be overstimulating the senses, the eyes, the brain. But also effect on the mind is that we rely on stimulation a lot through our day. We're always looking for the next thing to do, the next thing to read, the next person to talk to. So if you come into a room to meditate, just sit down quietly, watch your breath, you've taken away a lot of that stimulation. So it's like your mind has lost a lot of its supports. And so to suddenly jump to being mindful of the breath, which is very subtle and not that stimulating in the beginning of the practice, is quite a challenge. And so one of the things that will help with that is practicing mindfulness through the day, having periods where you set aside all the different stimulations and practicing more mindfulness in more simple situations where you're doing a little bit of breath meditation here and there through your day, or doing walking meditation, even when you're just walking around doing other business, to be mindful of walking, and to practice not always relying on the stimulation of other people or technology and things to keep you going. Actually, to practice being still with yourself for short periods. Then when you come to meditate, you're more used to it. You're more used to letting go of the desires for stimulation, and you can turn your energy inwards to being mindful of the breath, and your mind becomes stiller, brighter because of that. Of course, when mindfulness is strong, drowsiness, sleepiness will fade away. But you need to practice. And every meditator will have done it. They'll have worked through periods of drowsiness. But most meditators will, sooner or later, find success. And it's one of the moments of personal achievement when you've been very drowsy, sleepy in your meditation. You're sitting there, but you didn't give up. You didn't stop. You kept going. You've put effort into your posture. Maybe you opened your eyes for a while, get light in. Really work to be mindful of the breath, and finally come out the other side of your drowsiness, and the drowsiness fades, and you realize it was what we call a hindrance, a nivarana. And the 5 hindrances, drowsiness, lethargy, apathy is one of them. They all can be let go of. they're temporary. And that's part of our practice, is to learn how to let go of them, bringing up the mindfulness and developing insight as well into how they arise, what we can do to let go of them and overcome them. So with drowsiness, one of the things you get familiar with is the onset of drowsiness. As you're sitting, you'll notice there are certain characteristics that come up as you're beginning to become drowsy. Your mind moves away from the breath. Maybe you become a little less aware of your body, and your mind starts to move into the dream state. So literally the state just before falling asleep. But those send messages to you. You can catch yourself before you're sleepy. You just catch that movement of the mind into the dream state, the letting go of the sensations of the body, the dreams coming, and you catch at that moment. You may bring your mind back to the breath and actually let go of your sleepiness at that time. But that comes through practice, awareness. Or you may, at the moment you're realizing you're getting caught into drowsiness, if you're really struggling to pull yourself out of it, you may have something else another approach. You can stand up or go and do walking meditation because you're just falling asleep when you sit. The Buddha also encouraged other simple techniques which you could adapt as well. So like the Buddha said, rub your eyes, pull your ears, wash your face, go outside. If it's at night, look at the stars, get the fresh air of the night air and look at the stars. But you could adapt that and just realize you need a bit more stimulation, because just sitting trying to be mindful of the breath is not working, especially in the middle of the day when you've got a full stomach, you feel hot, tired, maybe it's too difficult. Another method we use to deal with sleepiness is chanting. Maybe not so convenient during a retreat where you're sitting with other people or following a program, but if you're on your own and you're falling asleep, maybe the first thing to do is not try to be mindful of the breath yet, but do some recitation of Dhamma or chanting. That's much easier to arouse mindfulness and energy, and often more successful. The best way is to learn chants off by heart, so you can sit there and just recite a chant, paritas, morning, evening chanting, reflections that we do from the chanting book. Learn them off by heart. When you notice you're becoming sleepy, start reciting or chanting. And if you can remember off by heart, it's very easy to do that. You just start remembering, and that wakes your mind up. The process that it's internal stimulation, rather than depending on a phone or watching somebody or talking to somebody. You just start chanting and your mindfulness comes up better. Then maybe once you're more awake, then you can turn to watch the breath, because the breath is a very subtle object. So chanting, reciting Dhamma, sometimes listening to Dhamma, but you notice as a teacher giving talks, often people are falling asleep listening to the talks as well. So listening to Dhamma can work. And then the more creative ways, there's many of them. So when I was a young monk, in one monastery I lived, it was a big forest. And to deal with sleepiness, there was a beautiful log on the side of the forest path from my hut to the main hall. And that walk was about 1 kilometer, so it was a long walk. But about halfway, there was a beautiful log that had been slightly cut, so it was quite flat on top. You could even sleep on it, and sometimes monks would sleep there just to sleep very simply in the forest, or you could sit on it. But it's about 1 meter off the ground, so if you sat on it and you were sleepy, you might fall off. And the fear of falling off was enough to keep you awake, because you didn't want to hurt yourself falling off. Sometimes they say go and sit on the edge of a well or a cliff, but that sounds a bit dangerous. But something that's just a bit raised up, like the edge of a bed or something like that, so that if you fall, you would hurt yourself, but you wouldn't seriously hurt yourself, not usually. Maybe that's enough to really stimulate you to be more careful, more alert. People put things on their head, small items on their head so that when they're sleepy they know because it falls off. There's a whole range of different creative practices you can do just to make yourself more mindful to deal with sleepiness. The last resort is always what the Buddha said, is if you're really exhausted and there's nothing you can do, you're just falling asleep, well, go and have a sleep. Have your sleep, get your energy back, and then carry on practicing afterwards. So even that is a possibility. There's a few pointers dealing with sleepiness, and it is a big, very common thing. Of course, once your mind is bright, mindfulness is strong, sleepiness disappears, doesn't it? And your mind is so bright, it's energized, it's still, it's energetic, and you might have a very beautiful meditation after that once you've got to that point. But of course, as we're practicing, it's not always like that, as we know. There's another question. If one is practicing 8 precepts in daily life and one refrains from drinking, however, if one gives a gift of alcohol to a friend or colleague or anyone, is that breaking the precepts? Well, think about it. Is it a good gift? If you're trying to keep the precepts, there's a reason for that. You'll probably think drinking alcohol is not so good for your practice, takes away your mindfulness, can bring you health issues, confusion, and often the more you drink, the more likely you are to break the other precepts. So if you've undertaken to keep precepts, why on earth would you give a gift to someone which will encourage them to break the precepts? So, you might say, well, it's not breaking the precept, you're not drinking, but you're giving the wrong gift, aren't you? You're encouraging someone else to break the precepts. So the Buddha said it's what we call a wrong gift. You don't give people guns or fishing rods because it encourages them to kill. You don't give drink or drugs because it encourages them to get intoxicated. Try not to give gifts that encourage people to act in unwholesome ways that may bring harm back to them, because then, of course, you're also making some negative karma yourself. So think about gifts, and there's plenty of good gifts you can give in the world without having to give alcohol or weapons or whatever it may be. It's up to us to think of it and be strong in our commitment to our precepts and our practice, and not just follow the herd. Maybe other people give bottles of wine or whiskey at Christmas. It doesn't mean to say you have to. You could give somebody something more useful to them, something that helps their health, or give them a meditation cushion, or a Dhamma book, or pay for them to go on a retreat, give them tickets to go on a meditation retreat somewhere, or something. Just be creative rather than just following the Christmas gifts of bottles of wine and things. Another question. Dear Ajahn, thank you very much for your guidance over the years. Your advice and wisdom is very helpful for me to continue the practice. My question is, I try to keep 7 precepts every day except the Vikala Bhojana, the 8th precept about not taking food afternoon. I found it's hard to keep Vikala Bhojana at home, although I was able to do it for 10 days at a retreat. I'm planning to do this retreat, Vikala Bhojana. Could you please give some tips and guidance to suppress my hunger? Thanks a lot. Triple Gem, bless you all. Well, I'm not sure it's in my power to suppress your hunger, because that's just a physical reaction to not having food in your stomach. The first thing you might do is notice the difference between genuine hunger from having digested all the food in your body and psychological hunger, just seeing nice food when you don't really need it, but your mind starts to think you do. And that's a delusion, isn't it? That's greed coming up, where you're thinking of things, either imagining, fantasizing food, which is quite common. Again, there's not a lot of stimulation on a meditation retreat, so your mind starts looking for something. So some people sit there creating the most delicious recipe or thinking of the best shop to go to for food. because of their wandering mind. So you have to bring that back to the present moment, and you have to work at letting go of that desire, seeing through it, seeing it as temporary, seeing it as not self, let it go. The practical side, well, you have to eat enough, obviously. So on a retreat, you're allowed to eat up between dawn and midday, keeping the eighth precept, or Vikala Bhojana. So, you can arrange it the way that suits you. You can have a breakfast at 7 o'clock or something in the morning, and then have lunch later. You can have just one meal, but eat plenty, eat enough. The Buddha didn't say you can't eat a lot at your meal. He just said eat the right amount for your body, your needs. And that's something you learn through practice. One thing you can do is count the number of mouthfuls you eat. Say you eat just one main meal during a retreat. Count the number of mouthfuls and get familiar with what the right amount of food for your needs are in terms of mouthfuls. And then you can really gauge whether you're overeating or undereating. But it comes through experiencing, learning to eat enough, eat the right amount, and whether you need to split your food into 2 meals, breakfast and lunch, before midday. That's within your choice. And in the evening, you can still have refreshments that are allowable in the Vinaya, so fruit juice that's been strained of pulp, chocolate, sweet sugar, honey. There's a few things we can eat. Some people will eat cheese based on the teaching of what we call Nawanitang, which is allowable for monks, which is interpreted as cheese by some people. Prunes, ginger, there's a few kind of products, fruits that are considered medicinal allowables. So there's a few small things you can have in the evening just to keep you going, refresh you. And of course water, just fill yourself up with water also helps. And you learn, you practice with it. But like you say, it's difficult at home because you're surrounded by people maybe who are not keeping any precepts, or certainly not the Vikala Bhojana precept. So you have to really determine for yourself what you want to do, be firm on it, make your decision with yourself, and then try and stick to it, and just allow other people to do what they're going to do. So as a monk, we never eat after midday, but sometimes we visit home or visit people we know in the evening, and maybe they're having food, there's food around. But over time, if you practice this, you get used to just ignoring it. It doesn't matter, it's not something you do. You don't eat in the evening, so you don't really give it a second thought once you're established in your practice. And many people I know who keep the 8 precepts, they get to that point where they just know, it's after midday, I don't eat. Even if other people are eating, there's food around, I don't. But, it takes practice to get to that point. Once you're there, it's like you're free. So I know some people who actually cook for other members of the family with who are not practicing, they're just normal. And this person keeps 8 precepts, but cooks as an act of kindness for their family members, but doesn't eat the food themselves. And you could say that's really great, discipline and practice, because, to cook for other people when you're not eating is not easy, but it can be done. So it's mainly about practice, discipline, determination, reminding you why you're doing it. So of course you might have a few rumblings in your stomach in the evening, but you can drink, have the refreshments, and then think of the benefits. If you're not eating in the evening, you've got all that time and energy free. You don't have to cook, wash up. You've got time free. Your body feels light, which is one of the main reasons we don't eat in the evening. Your body is light and ready to meditate. And people often have their best insights, best meditation through the night, when the body is at its lightest. So sometimes the best time to meditate, if you get there, is like, say, midnight or 1 a.m. People sometimes have really clear insights into letting go. Their mind is still, they can see the impermanence of the body and so on, because at that time their stomach is empty and they actually meditate quite in a relaxed way. But it comes through practice, and you have to learn what your body's needs are. And of course, if it's too difficult, we'll just keep the 5 precepts and give yourself some small snack in the evening or something. That's okay as well. But it's a very noble thing to practice the 8 precepts, and it's generally considered a cause for advancing in your meditation if you can. One of the funniest practices I had was when I stayed with a teacher called Ajahn on the edge of Bangkok, and the back of the monastery was open fields and swamp, clear. Front of the monastery was a housing estate with shops. And every afternoon we come out to do sweep leaves in the monastery, because it's a forest monastery but right on the edge of the village. And you sweep the leaves at 3, and all the food stalls are just starting up, ready to catch people coming home from work. And so all these smells would be drifting across. So as the monks were sweeping, some of them would start saying, "Oh, they got some barbecued pork on today," or "Oh, there's a nice chicken curry coming through." And you could see the suffering of particularly the new monks, young monks, is like, ugh. They're just counting the hours. I'm not going to get anything for another 12, 15 hours before I'm going to be able to eat again. So they would be suffering a bit. So a sense of humor helps. You laugh, and maybe get a clothes peg and put it on your nose or something. So you just have to be tough sometimes. When you see people who are tough, they're willing to sacrifice for others, be patient, be disciplined, and you get strength. So hang around with other people who keep the 8 precepts, and you start to get the hang of it. It gets easier if you're with other people also keeping the 8 precepts. Another question. Dear Luang Por, thanks for the retreat. We undertook the 8 precepts in the early morning. I used to break the rule of training to refrain from eating outside the time. Without eating, my body temperature was down to 35 degrees Celsius in the evening. I knew this is because of illness. Could you please tell me some stories about sick meditators keeping their precepts? How do our teachers deal with illness? Thanks again. Carrying on from the last question, discipline, determination, practice, regular practice, and it becomes second nature. So like for myself, before I became a monk, like everyone had the thought, how will I cope without eating afternoon? Will it be a problem? Will I suffer in some way? And I asked monks, and they just said, just do it and you'll see it's not that hard. So I did it, and I found out it isn't that hard. You can do it. Most people can. Occasionally, maybe somebody has a serious illness of some sort, maybe to do with digestion or something that means they may have to keep the 5 precepts. And that's okay. If you have a good reason, then the 5 precepts are there for that. You don't have to go without food in the evening. But monks, of course, we're not allowed to eat even for medicinal reasons. We don't take food. Sometimes they say lie in your stomach to take medication in the evening. Well, we just take the allowable medicines, but we don't eat. And you get used to it, and you don't think too much about it, and you work out what you need, how you compensate. You eat enough food in the earlier part of the day, you get enough rest if you are ill. Generally speaking, the value of keeping the precepts, the discipline, the mindfulness it helps support, the meditation it supports, is the bonus, is the benefit or the reward of keeping the precept, and that outweighs the comfort of eating in the evening. And we also know there can be many disadvantages of eating too much, eating the wrong kinds of food. The Buddha said even, you eat too much rich food in the evening, then you'll have bad dreams. It can be a stimulus for unpeaceful mind states when you sleep, especially if you eat just before you go to sleep. It's maybe not that healthy physically or mentally. So sometimes think about the disadvantages of eating in the evening. and then look at those, like you've asked, those teachers, those practitioners, men, women, monks, nuns, who have done it and gone through serious illness sometimes, not eating in the evening. It's one of the rules we can't relax as a monk. And, so many of my friends, teachers, people I know of, people I actually have lived with, have been through serious illness without having to eat in the evening and survived. And it becomes part of the practice, reflecting on the body, the impermanence and selfless nature of the body, sticking their mind with the Dhamma rather than comfort food, say. And here I'm not giving medical advice, I'm just saying this is how people have practiced and they have survived. I'm not saying you have to do that every time, but sometimes monks, when they are ill, they say, I'm going to deal with this illness by fasting. So not only stop eating in the evening, they stop eating altogether. Many monks do that when they get stomach problems from food poisoning or something like that. They quite often will just fast for a couple of days and get rid of the illness that way. I've done that myself sometimes, just fast for a day or two with certain kinds of illness, and it seems to clear your system up. You become physically weak for a while, but then afterwards you feel good and you clear that illness up, especially if you're in the forest without much medical help. Fasting sometimes has some very good advantages, even though it can be hard to do, of course. I've seen monks bear with malaria and dysentery and dengue fever and injuries and accidents and those sort of later in life diseases like heart disease, memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, liver problems, cancer, of course. So many illnesses, but they just adapt their practice to the changing nature of their body. And so that they don't necessarily have to start eating in the evening just to deal with cancer or something. They may rest more, they may take certain medications and medicines, natural or other, in the evening. And I see monks practice very well through illness, and often it's a time where monks get great insight into the selfless nature of body and mind, experiencing the pains of illness, the discomfort, the arise and passing away of different painful feelings. Contemplating and meditating through those illnesses sometimes can even lead people to realization. I know one monk who got severely ill and came out of it a sotapanna. He went in an unenlightened person, came out a stream winner. It happens. And sometimes illness can stimulate the practice. It makes you try harder, makes you be more mindful, contemplate letting go of the sense of self that might form around painful feelings, anxiety about the future, fear of death, all of that. Ajahn Chah himself is well known for having used a lot of patience, a lot of meditation to deal with illness. And not always, especially at the end of his life, he had doctors helping him in many ways, but particularly in his younger life, when he was in the jungle with no access to doctors or medicine, he had to deal with severe malaria and other kinds of illness. Stomach problems is a very common one, just with a bit of herbal medicine, and he said with a lot of Dhamma. The term is Dhamma Osot, the medicine of the Dhamma, using patience, using wisdom, using faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha to help you through a difficulty. Your mental state is sometimes just as important as the physical help you get with medication and the different ways doctors say can help you. Your state of mind is just as important. And your immune system is boosted by your meditation. So Ajahn Chah had very bad malaria for a long time with no medication, and he thought he would die from it. He actually was prepared to die, and he got his monk's identity booklet and put it with a box of matches next to his head so that if he thought he was about to die, he would light a match and burn it, because he didn't want to be a burden on the villagers in the area where he was staying, because he was miles away from his home. And he knew, out of respect, if a monk dies, the villagers are going to have to do a funeral, look after the body, have a funeral, and so on. And he didn't want to burden them. And he didn't want to have to burden them with traveling hundreds of kilometers to go and find his relatives. So if he burned his ID book, no one would know who he was. They could have a very simple, quick funeral. So he was ready to do that, thinking he was going to die. But he meditated through it, and he came out of it. And he said, people said, what did you survive with? And he said, the Dhamma, his practice of Dhamma. Like he said, one of his big insights, which is sort of relevant here, he saw a deer walking past his hut in the forest one day when he was lying on his back, very ill. And he just started thinking. He said at that time he had a little bit of self-pity, oh, poor me, here in the forest, no one helping me, I'm ill, what am I going to do, what's going to become of me? That kind of doubt came up, I think. But he saw the deer coming and he thought, deer, they don't have anyone giving them medicine, they don't go to hospital, they just put up with it, and carry on. If they're ill, they just put up with it patiently. If they can do it, I'm going to do it. So he just determined to be patient through his illness. And he said, I had the thought, if I die, I die. If I recover, I recover. I'll accept whatever outcome comes, I'll accept it. And after that, he recovered gradually. So here we get deer. We see deer all the time. So every time I see a deer, I think, I wish them well. And I think, oh, you can survive in this cold, wet night sky, because it's quite often cold and wet here at the night. I'm going to have to, because if they can, I can. We have to learn these things, don't we? Some of the lessons we learn are quite hard. It's not that Buddhist monks aren't allowed to seek out medication. We're allowed to go to hospital, but we should also try to bring up the Dhamma to deal with the other side of illness. The mental stress, the anxiety, the reaction to pain. Pain management is helped by practicing mindfulness and insight, vipassana. That can help as well. And sometimes we come out of our illness much wiser than before. And one thing I've noticed with lay people also is like, it's only when they become ill that they start meditating. Before they're ill, everything's good, they don't think of meditation, they don't need it because life is good and they're enjoying themselves. When they get ill, they start to feel the pressure, there's painful feelings, anxiety, and then they think, oh, I better meditate. So actually illness can be a cause for good things. It can be the stimulus for you to start meditating again. One meditator was in the Monash hospital with cancer, and she had meditated as a student and then forgot all about it while she got married, worked, had a family. Then she got cancer and thought, it's time to meditate again. So it got her meditating in the hospital. One of the reasons she was meditating is because she saw other people around her suffering mentally with their situation, the fear of the illness, the anger, with the pain and the difficulty. She said, I don't want to suffer like that. And she had a basis in Buddhist teaching, so she started meditating again, quite diligently every day, and got quite peaceful as she faced her illness. And she said, wow, when I was healthy, I wasn't as peaceful as this. So in a way, her illness, it was something she was thankful for because it prompted her to meditate, and she experienced a lot of peace and understanding from her meditation that she didn't have before. So sometimes it's the problems and the suffering that actually stimulate good things in the practice. When everything's going well and we're comfortable, often we get a bit lazy. There's another question. How much sitting meditation should a lay person do in a day to have good concentration and mindfulness? A lot. We always ask these questions because we want to have a figure, then we can do it and pat ourselves on the back. I did my hour, I did my this and my that. So I just say a lot. You do a lot. Do more than your mind tells you. Your mind says 30 minutes, do 1 hour. Your mind says do an hour, do 2. Your mind says, do 1 sitting per day, then do 2 sittings per day. Just increase it and put more effort in, you'll get more back from it. It's a lot of meditation is about practice. The more you do it, the more effort you put in, the more disciplined you become, the more experience you gain, the better it becomes. The more you understand about yourself, you understand what are the hindrances, you understand how to abandon them, what is a peaceful mind, what is not a peaceful mind. You become much more aware of yourself. And little by little, that stimulates you and prompts you to want to meditate more. So basically, do as much as you can. But one thing is, you can be creative in the lay life, in the sense you may not have many hours to just sit quietly or walk quietly, because you've got other duties and things to do, of course. But you'll notice there's many moments in your day when you can take 5 minutes just to practice mindfulness of breathing or any other meditation. Or when you're walking around between jobs or from the car to a job or whatever, you can walk mindfully. Especially if you've done a retreat and learned to do walking meditation like we are on this retreat, then when you're walking just to the shops or to the workplace or around your home, those moments can become moments of mindfulness of walking. So you've also got to see meditation isn't simply sitting with your eyes closed. It's also about developing the same qualities that you develop when you're sitting with your eyes closed. So the mindfulness, the all-round awareness, bringing attention back to the body, to the posture. Then you realize you actually got lots of small moments when you can practice mindfulness through your day. You know, those moments when you tend to just be looking at the phone, put the phone down. You don't need to look at it so much. Look at your own mind, go to the breath for a few minutes. You know, as you're walking, just walk mindfully. You don't have to do anything special other than just be aware of yourself. So as you practice more, you realize there's a lot more you can do and you can be more creative in your practice. But generally, you know, best of all, I'd say minimum, do some meditation in the morning before you go to work or go out and do things. Do some more meditation later in the day. That's the minimum. Morning and evening at some time, whatever time suits you. Because then you're constantly coming back to watching your mind, developing mindfulness, developing insight into impermanence, not self. Little by little you'll get progress that way. You know, a lot of people just do it once a week, once a month, or just once when they feel like it, you know, once a year. Where if that's the case, it's going to be hard to see much progress. Try and commit to meditate every day and maybe twice a day. Then you might get some real insight. Last question for this session, or for the moment. We try to keep 5 precepts while attending to issues in our day-to-day lives, but there are some instances we have to say white lies in order to save someone from some problem or to make sure that we do not hurt anyone. If we say the truth, we may be putting someone in trouble, especially in workplaces. How can we avoid this type of situation? Is it our bad karma that we have to face such situations? Well, in the biggest sense, yeah, it's our bad karma that we're born as humans because we're still born into a realm of suffering, samsara. It's imperfect, it's bound up with dukkha. So we do have to face difficult situations and make choices. That's why Nibbana is better. They don't have to do that. They don't have to tell white lies in Nibbana. But on the way to Nibbana, we have to deal with the world and its problems and our role in it. So, I mean, there's ways and ways, aren't there, of dealing with these problems. Sometimes you just keep quiet. Rather than tell a lie, just keep quiet. You know, you don't have to answer everything. That's one solution to the white lie problem. Another is to consider over time. The trouble is, if you tell white lies, you tend to tell more and more of them, and you never know where to stop or where to draw the line. You can say, well, I just did it to help someone, I didn't mean any harm by it. But if it becomes habitual, your mind becomes fuzzy. If you're honest and you look and observe, your mind becomes fuzzy, your speech is a bit loose, uncertain. You could say it's a basis for losing mindfulness. And you can't be sure what you've said and when because it's so loose, isn't it? You can say the truth today, a lie tomorrow. You start to stand on shaky ground and you can't remember what you said to who and where and whether it was true or not. When it becomes habitual, it's like that. Your mind is not peaceful, so when you try and meditate, it's not easy to settle down. You'll find people who really are keen to meditate and develop deep stillness in samadhi, they stop telling lies. They find other solutions. They go quiet. They grit their teeth, they tell the truth if they have to, they stay quiet, they avoid it if they have to. They find ways not to tell lies, white lies or grey lies or black lies, because it leaves a stain in the mind and it leads to a loss of mindfulness. And you want to preserve your mindfulness. You also want to preserve your self-respect and self-awareness. So again, telling white lies can lead to a loss of self-respect, can lead to other people losing respect for you because they know you don't always tell the truth once they find out. Once you know someone can lie, then it means everything is thrown into doubt. It's a bit like when a criminal judge in court is found to be corrupt. Then they say all his previous cases are now thrown into doubt, and whatever decisions he made in the past are thrown into doubt. It's terrible. We don't know who was true, who was telling lies, what's honest, what's not. It's a big problem for, say, the legal system when that happens. Same sort of thing for us. Once we tell lies, we are not fully comfortable in our speech and our feeling towards ourselves because we know we've been lying. Other people also are not fully comfortable, they don't fully respect us. Of course, you can always think up a scenario where you're trying to help someone with a white lie, and so it just depends on the situation, doesn't it? But be careful, because it's a slippery slope into unwholesome states of mind and a lack of mindfulness. So that's the end of the written questions. Are there any more at your end? Darren or Wenjie, did you have any other questions come in?
Yes, no more. There are 6 questions.
Oh.
Maybe I read the first one. In the
May,
opening talk,
maybe, hello? I was just going to say, maybe just read one, because we're at the time that we just got a couple of minutes left, and save the next batch of 5 for the next Q&A session.
Sure. Okay, I'll read the first one.
Okay.
Okay. So in the opening talk, you mentioned about forgiving oneself in the practice. I have read that forgiving oneself and others are critical for loving kindness to arise. I only have intellectual understanding of this. Can you elaborate more so that I can have a deeper realization of their connection?
Well, as you say, forgiveness is really coming from the qualities of metta and karuna, kindness and compassion. Maybe you could turn it around and say, if you can't forgive somebody or you can't forgive yourself, what does that mean? It means you're holding on to anger, critical, negative thoughts towards yourself, towards others. That's suffering, isn't it? Anger in its nature is a state of suffering. It brings with it some unpleasant feeling, mental feeling, or even sometimes physical feeling. So if you're not forgiving, you're going to continue suffering. So then you could say, well, do I want to suffer? No. Therefore, I should forgive in order to be free from that kind of suffering, the suffering of anger, ill will, or even hatred. Then people think, but if I forgive, it's like I'm not acknowledging the past and my mistakes and faults or somebody else's bad behavior. I'm being weak, I'm covering it over, I'm ignoring it. That's not the way you forgive. You forgive with mindfulness. You're fully aware. That's the aim, is to bring up awareness, and you acknowledge what you've said and done, or what someone else has said and done, and what's happened. So you're not denying anything or suppressing anything. You're acknowledging with mindfulness, with full awareness, but you're also acknowledging that you can't change what's been done. It's happened. So it's better to move on, and you can learn your lessons, whatever lessons you need to learn. If it's other people, you wish for them to learn lessons. You may not be able to force that to happen, you can't, but you wish for that to happen, from them to be wiser, better, if they've been doing bad things, making mistakes, just as you wish yourself to learn and move on. So you forgive in order to let go and move on. And if you have recurring guilt feelings and memories of bad things you've said and done, well, just keep forgiving until eventually you can be at peace with yourself. That's your aim. So it's not usually a practice you can do once. You may do it once with someone else in a more formal way, so like before someone dies, it's a good skillful thing to do is ask forgiveness from them in case you've ever caused them bad feeling, hurt them, whatever, because they're about to die. So it's a good thing to do. But for yourself, it may be an ongoing thing. It's like you forgive and you move on, and then something comes up again, the same sort of thing. Okay, you have to establish mindfulness, learn what has to be learned, and then let go. And you keep doing it until you understand what is what. You understand the past, what's happened, what's arisen, what's passed away in the past. Now you're in the present, and you say, well, from here on I'm intending not to make those same mistakes, do those same bad things. And that's setting your mind in a place of goodness, good mental health, good attitude. And you do your best. And you may make some other mistakes in the future where you'll do the same again, you'll forgive. But forgiveness isn't just like a cheap kind of passing it over and then carrying on doing the same bad things. That's not, that's not true forgiveness, is it? That's just being casual or finding excuses or whatever. What you're trying to do is become mindful and clear on your actions, good and bad, and the bad you're trying to learn from, so you change your behavior. And then you can move on. And we can do that as humans, but it takes some practice and effort, so it's something you have to keep working at until you're free from the past. And this is something very central to the Buddhist teaching. You have to free yourself from clinging to the thoughts about the past, particularly the negative ones about what we've done that was wrong, what others have done wrong. We have to let go of ideas of hatred, revenge, anger directed towards ourselves and others. And on the higher level, just to see, those feelings are not self. They're just impermanent feelings, thoughts, memories that arise, pass away. There's no one in them. They're just mental states that arise, pass away, so they can be let go of. No need to cling to them, just let them go with mindfulness and that wisdom.